John, thank you very much. It is indeed an honor to be with you today. And as he and I were talking, he was classmates, high school classmates with one of the great conservative senators in our country, and that's Jim DeMint. And I want to thank ISO Poly Films for allowing me to come here today, and John, you in particular, for opening your business as we discuss a plan that will get America working again. Today I lay before the American people my cut, balance, and grow plan. It cuts taxes, and it also cuts the spending. And it balances the budget by 2020, and it grows jobs, and it grows the economy. Now, it neither reshuffles the status quo, nor does it expand the ways that Washington can reach into your pocketbooks. It reorders the way they do business in Washington by reinventing the tax code and getting our nation back to a fiscal health through balanced budgets and entitlement reform. Central to my plan is giving every American the option of throwing out that 3 million words of the current tax code, and I might add the cost of complying with all of that code, in order to pay a 20% flat tax on their income. The size of the current code is more than 72,000 pages. That's represented by this palette right over here and the reams of paper. That's what the current tax code looks like. The best representation of my plan is this postcard. This is the size of what we're talking about right here. Taxpayers will be able to fill this out and file their taxes on that. And each individual taxpayer will have a choice. You can continue to pay your taxes, as well as the accountants and the lawyers and under the current tax system that we got, or you can file your taxes on this postcard with the deductions on there for interest on your mortgage, your charitable giving, your state and local taxes, and then deduct those and send it in. Under my plan, you're no longer going to have to worry about paying taxes on Social Security when you retire, or your family members. Yeah. Or John, your family members paying the death tax when you're gone. I mean, you can save. And you think about that. He's worked hard. He's going to pass this on to his family one of these days. And the idea that the federal government's going to take half of that's nonsense. And I might add, you can also wave goodbye to the capital gains tax as well as the tax on dividends. We'll increase the standard exemption for individuals and dependents to $12,500. And that means that families in the middle and on the lower end of the economic scale will have the opportunity to get ahead. Taxes will be cut across all income groups in America. And the net benefit will be more money in Americans' pockets with greater investment in the private economy instead of the federal government. Now on the corporate tax side, I'm offering an equally bold reform. My plan closes those corporate loopholes. It ends the special breaks for special interest and stops the gravy train of lobbyists and tax lawyers in Washington, D.C. They're there at the trough. In exchange for a corporate-free, or I should say a corporate tax-free of carve-outs and exclusions, I offer a much lower rate of 20% that represents the average corporate rate among the developed nations. And it'll make our corporations much more competitive on the global scale. will shut down the cottage industry of corporate tax evasion by creating a tax that is broad and fair and low. And my plan also offers incentives for corporations to invest in America again with two major reforms. First, we'll transition to a territorial tax system on corporate income that's earned overseas. Now, what this means is that companies that pay the appropriate taxes in the country where that income was earned, but aren't taxed a second time when that income gets moved back to the United States. And now, secondly, all corporate profits currently that are languishing overseas, I will offer a one-time reduced rate of 5.25% for a limited period of time on those repatriated dollars to bring those dollars back to the United States. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce said that this one-time tax reduction would bring back over $1 billion in capital back to the United States, creating up to 2.9 million jobs, and increase the economic output in this country by $360 billion. In other words, it's the kind of economic stimulus that President Obama could have achieved if he wasn't so hell-bent on passing big government schemes that have failed American workers. You know, today's America's combined corporate tax rate of 39.2% is the second highest in the developed world. It's time to overhaul our tax code so that companies like ISO Polyfilms can invest more in their people and in their products. Tax rates have consequences. The liberals myopically ignore the realities of human nature. They think raising rates will raise revenue. What they don't understand is that large employers have choices. And I might add, so do wealthy individuals. And that includes moving money offshore. When they try to take, when the federal government tries to take too much, they end up hurting the very people they supposedly seek to help, the working class. We need tax policy that embraces the world as it is, not what some liberal ideologue wishes it to be. The goal of my Cut, Balance, and Grow plan is to unleash job creation, to address the current economic crisis, while at the same time generating a stable source of revenue to address our record deficit and put our fiscal house in order. My plan should not be viewed in a vacuum, but in comparison to the continuation of the status quo. It provides employers and investors certainty, which is critical, John, in getting capital back into the economy. You know, the President's plan, it provides temporary tax relief, which it does nothing to encourage long-term investment because it doesn't provide the private sector any certainty. The way to stimulate the economy is not through temporary tax relief or government spending. It's to stimulate private spending through permanent tax relief. You see, the flat tax will unleash growth, but growth's not enough. We must put a stop to this entitlement culture that risks the financial sovereignty or solvency of this country for future generations. I mean, the red flags are alarming. Our children are born with a $46,000 debt, Deborah. I mean, every young child that's born has a $46,000 debt to the federal government. Our credit was downgraded for the first time this past August, in part because of the lack of seriousness about deficit reduction. You know, according to the White House Office of Management and Budget, by the end of the year, our debt will exceed the size of America's economy for the first time in 65 years. We are on the road to ruin paved by state serfdom. Freeing our children from financial disaster requires the courage to reform the entitlements. And my plan establishes firm principles to preserve Medicare and Social Security for today's beneficiaries while saving it for tomorrow's generations. I'm putting forward 5 principles to save Social Security for the long term. First, we will protect existing benefits for current retirees, and we'll work with Congress on the exact age where those nearing retirement are grandfathered out of the changes to the program. Now, secondly, we will end the current pillaging of the Social Security Trust Fund by Washington politicians. See, here's the hard fact. The trust fund is full of IOUs without a single dime of money left over from what workers have paid in. The politicians have borrowed against it for years. And in order to redeem those IOUs in the fund, they're going to have to either raise your taxes or cut spending on other programs to replenish it. That's the only 2 choices. Now, here's the other hard truth. If we don't act, in 25 years, benefits will be slashed by 23% overnight. Protecting Social Security begins by protecting the solvency of the fund and stopping all of the current borrowing from the fund, just as we've done with the Highway Trust Fund. The third principle of reform is to allow young workers to invest a portion of their payroll taxes into private accounts if they so choose. I'm not naive. I have an idea that this idea will be attacked. But a couple of facts are worth stating. One, the return on investment in Social Security is so small, it's kind of like having an interest-bearing savings account at the bank. And over the long term, the markets generate a much higher yield. Now, secondly, opposition to this simple measure is based on a simple supposition, and that is that the people are not smart enough to look out for themselves. I don't believe that. Liberals think the American people can't be trusted to safeguard even a portion of their retirement dollars. I happen to think it is time to end the nanny state and empower our people to exercise greater control over their money. You know, and the fourth principle is to return to the pre-1983 law and allow state and local governments to newly opt out of Social Security and instead allow their employees to pay solely into state or locally run programs. And this has been done around the country, I might add, with very good results. We ought to allow it again. And lastly, we should raise the retirement age for those younger workers on a graduated basis to reflect the longer lifespan of today's Americans. Now, I'm going to work with Congress to determine the right formula, beginning at the right age. But this is just common sense, and it can help save Social Security for future generations. You know, we'll also reform Medicare to save it for future generations of Americans as well. And we'll do this by working with Congress on several options, including giving patients greater flexibility in choosing the plan that best fits their unique needs through things like bundled premium support payments for the individual, or as a credit against purchase of health insurance, for instance. Second, we should look at gradually raising the age of Medicare eligibility. And thirdly, we should consider adjusting Medicare benefits to be paid on a sliding scale based on the income of the recipient. And lastly, we must tackle the $100 billion in annual waste and fraud and save this valuable program for Americans who live longer. Now, my plan also restructures Medicaid, returning control over that program and the dollars needed to administer it to the states. You know, one-size-fits-all health care doesn't work for people on private plans in the form of Obamacare, and it sure doesn't work with public plans such as Medicaid. Listen, Washington has broken it, and they've shown no will to fix it either. We must give the states the flexibility to fix Medicaid, to control those costs. You see, these reforms are essential to balancing the budget. And my plan balances the budget as fast as any serious plan that's being offered out there in the year 2020 with reforms to entitlements, greater economic growth, and with cuts to discretionary spending. And I don't take the tack of the current president with his arbitrary cuts to defense spending. The question we must ask is not what we can afford to spend on national defense, but what does it cost to keep America secure? At the same time, we're going to reform the way that we spend money in Washington so that we can balance the budget in 8 years. But to truly protect taxpayers, we need the extra protection of a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. I'll also reduce the spending at the Department of Education, the Department of Energy, the EPA, and a whole host of other agencies, returning greater control to the states. My plan also reduces non-defense discretionary spending by $100 billion in year one, and it builds on those savings in the years to come. I'll also institute several principal reforms to the budgetary process, which are contained in my cut, Balance and Grow plan on my website, and you can go there and read it. And it is not the length of the novel War and Peace, by the way. It's relatively simple and straightforward, but it is a very bold approach. Included in my budget reforms are elimination of baseline budgeting that assumes that the previous expenditures are sacrosanct, an end to non-emergency spending and emergency bills. Who would have thought of that? A permanent stop to the Bridge to Nowhere projects through the elimination of earmarks. I couple these budgetary reforms with an overhaul of the regulatory process. When federal agencies like the NLRB are dictating to companies where they can create jobs and where they cannot, they have overstepped their bounds and undermined our free market system. On my first day in office, I will freeze all pending federal regulations and immediately begin a review of all regulations put in place since January of 2008. Today, the Federal Register contains 165,000 pages. The index alone is 1,100 pages. And somehow, despite not having any of these new regulations for over the first 219 years of this country's history, America not only survived, it thrived. The federal nanny states' heavy-handed regulations are keeping our economy in the ditch. And it's time to review and to scrap those regulations that are harming jobs and killing growth. Now, lastly, one of the greatest impediments to investment, John, you and I were talking about this before we came in, is the Dodd-Frank banking regulations. And I will lead the charge to eliminate them. Dodd-Frank is killing small banks. It is freezing assets to credit just when small businesses need them most. It enshrines bailouts and the notion of too big to fail in federal law. It benefits Wall Street while it's killing Main Street. It is wrong, it is unfair, and it has got to go. Listen, my plan doesn't trim around the edges, and it doesn't bow down to the established interest. But it's the kind of bold reform that is needed to jolt this economy out of the doldrums, to renew American prosperity. And those who oppose it, they're going to wrap themselves in the cloak of status quo. America is under a crushing burden of debt. And the president simply offers larger deficits and the politics of class warfare. Others simply offer these microwave plans with warmed over reforms based on current ingredients. Americans, though, they aren't searching for a reshuffling of the status quo, which simply empowers the entrenched interest. This is a change election. And I offer a plan that changes the way that Washington does business. The great issue facing this nation is whether we have the courage to confront the spending and the vision to get our economy growing again. We need a tax code that unleashes growth instead of preventing it, that promotes fairness, not class warfare, that sparks investment in America instead of overseas interest. It's time to create incentives for American companies to invest in American workers. And it's time to end these corporate loopholes, end the special tax breaks for special interests, end the gravy train for lobbyists and tax lawyers. It is time to pass a tax that is flat and fair and that frees our employers and our people to invest and grow and prosper. We will set our employers and our people free by slashing the cost of government, cutting taxes for the middle-class families, balancing our budget, and growing our economy. The future of America is too important to be left to the Washington politicians. To get America working again, we got to cut taxes and spending, balance the federal budget, and grow our economy and jobs. My plan unleashes American ingenuity for a new American century, restores the hopes and the dreams of our people. It renews our great promises, and it entrusts the fate of this nation in the hands of our people, setting them free. Let's be the land of the free again. God bless you, and thank you all for coming out and being with us today.